what does it really take to run a podcast that doesn't burn you out and still grows your brand? Today, we're pulling back the curtain with Anna of the podcast space. You're going to learn so much. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Behind the Workflow. My name is Simona Costantini.
And I'm Taly, Melo.
And today we have the literal one and only Anna Xavier, the podcast space, with us. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited that we're doing this. Finally, what an honor to be a guest.
I'm so excited. And I know Taly is so excited. And I will say, when you popped into our virtual studio this morning, I was so jealous because you are both matching and I am not. And I felt like I needed to go and change. And
you're matching your painting. Like both have flowers. So,
okay.
There you go.
I dig it. I dig it. So to start us off, for people who are listening right now, who don't know you, which is wild to me because how could you not? But if they don't know who you are yet, what is the podcast space all about? And what inspired you to start your show?
All right. So I am a podcast strategist and marketer. And so I help impact-driven entrepreneurs, women, minorities, and leaders who want to create a better world really get more visibility, grow their audience, and get to the goals that they want through their podcast. But how they do that is through sustainable content strategies, through growing in a way that feels exciting but not overwhelming, whether that's through the technical side or like actually looking at what they're talking about and how they can create sustainability in the long run. Because we all know as podcasters, all the success we're going to have is if we stay in the game in the long run, right? Like it's a marathon, not a sprint. Yeah. And many podcasters start a show and then not many actually continue because, as we know, there's a lot of things, and if you don't have any systems, you're not going to grow. And so my podcast, because I launched the podcast space as a company as a full service agency back in 2020, in January of 2020. And then I was producing content at the time. I was a podcast strategist and I was producing, so editing, doing all the things beginning to end. And I realized that after I shifted the goal of my agency from being that to being more content strategy, online learning, and resources like guides and downloadables, I realized that, you know what, like I need to go through the process because my journey has been, I have a degree in journalism back in Portugal. I moved to the UK, learned about online radio / podcasting there, and then I moved to the US. And so through working with a lot of different hosts, I was always only kind of like doing parts of the job, right? So I would be like a strategist and maybe the co-host, or maybe I was the editor and the strategist, or just the editor, or just the host. And, you know, I would send that over to be edited by someone else, or just different elements of it. And I was like, wait a minute, I need to be able to do the show so that one, I actually empathize through the whole experience as a host. And so I did the show not so much as an expert. Of course, I'm talking about my expertise because a podcast is exactly how to leverage your show to grow. But I was like, I want to experience fully as my clients are experiencing, to understand better when they say I'm overwhelmed. What does that look like? And so also if you're going to podcast conferences, and I do a lot of education and I do a lot of like trainings in partnership with companies and agencies, basically I was like, yeah, like I definitely need to have a show because I feel like I want to test things. I want to know what is actually going on. And it comes out as like a different experience when you say, yeah, I have a podcast versus, yeah, I work in podcasting. I found that it was more like testing and experiencing everything. So that's my journey.
I like it a lot. And you know what, Taly and I, and Taly, you can totally speak to this. When we thought about like the marketing side of Northflow, we're like, how do we create and promote and share about a software that supports podcast production and all of the pieces and not have a show as part of that? You know what I mean?
So it just made sense to create Behind the Workflow.
Exactly, which is what we are here doing now.
All right. So Anna, you've helped so many podcasters, of course, not just launch, but also stick with it and grow. So I'm like thinking a lot of us are like craving kind of clarity, you know? And of course, structure. So let's talk a little bit about your workflow and like really look like what's behind the scene. What are some of the steps that usually guide your clients?
Yes. So something that is very important, I find, to work with clients, and even myself, I ask this myself too. It's like, what's the point of the podcast? And I really lean into, and I was recently speaking in London about this in the podcast show, as like, how do you incorporate authenticity, but how do you stay, in really having that clarity, understanding why you're doing the show, because you're going to get really overwhelmed. It's kind of like getting in the car and saying, I have nowhere to go. I don't know how much gas I have, and I don't know which path I need to take, right? So everything feels very overwhelming, very scary, very technical. If you don't, for instance, getting on the highway, or if your car is very small for dirt roads, you're going to have a scary time. You're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, am I going to get stranded, right? So it's the same thing for podcasting. So I start with, what's the purpose of this episode, or what's the purpose of the podcast? And then we go from there. And so for instance, like, what's your capacity? If you're someone who's not very technical, I talk to clients all the time about this. When you're creating your strategy, you have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt. And I find this especially true for, the online learning world. I find that a lot of people follow someone else's recipe, but they don't take a second to think about, okay, this 17-step process, does it make sense for me, or am I just going with it because maybe the podcaster that I follow I just really admire their work. But the client that they serve, the process that they have set in place is for someone that has nothing to do with me, right? So I find that every single decision that I make is always based on the client's needs, how they best work. So if you're not someone very technical, why do you need 17 different processes, right? Like, why 17 different apps? Try to reduce your tech stack, for instance, as much as possible, so you actually can succeed and you're not wasting time in between those processes. But it all starts with, what's the purpose of this episode, right? So when I'm working through my workflow, is the idea first that is connected to the goal. So if the goal is for me to connect with a specific, or with a client, if it is to connect with a specific thought leader, and it's not so much for the audience, because what they really want is whether it's for like closing a deal with that person, or maybe having them nearby and like really connect to them. So then if you have, let's say, like a conference, then you can go and interview and invite them to be a speaker. You're not going to care as much as the processes that go after that. That was your goal. Whether if it's let's say an idea that is, for instance, like for my show, if it's about like, how does a podcast strategist work? Like, who needs one? That was something that all of my clients, some of them had an understanding of what it was. And then my ideal clients, through talking to podcast listeners, they told me like, I actually don't know, like, how many downloads do I need? What are all these things? So then I know that if that goal is more aligned with, for instance, my business, that post-production side needs to be a lot more tight. So I need to make sure that, for instance, I have a lot more social media posts, or, the blog post needs to be very thorough. So when I'm thinking through the goal, that's like the starting point. And then it's the idea, ironing out, so putting it in bullet points, scripting it, and then recording it. So, I record it, and then I always say, if you don't have a really strong hook to start the episode, or a really strong quote, it's really hard to create good marketing assets for your podcast, right? It all starts in the very script, so that it streamlines and simplifies my own workflow, right? So instead of spending 15 minutes or 10 minutes looking for that clip, if I know that the intro has like a very concise view of what that episode is about and going to entice listeners to go hit play, perfect, right? So I think through all of that. And so the next step is, of course, editing it, whether it's me editing or I send it to someone else. The client side, let's just take my example as like better, because I can go through, because sometimes clients vary. And so, yeah, I edit, and then I go through my very specific flow for the show notes. So I use AI. So I ask it, hey, this is the angle. This is exactly the format I want you to follow. These are the specific amount of paragraphs I want. And then this is the call to action. So I give it as much direction as I can. Get those show notes, get it in my Captivate player, which is where I host my podcast, and then put it on my website too. And then I go into the fun part, which is the thumbnails. So I create customizable thumbnails for each one. And of course, think of the titles, chapters, and then basically upload audio and video, and off we go. That's like my whole process. I find that for clients is different, but yeah, I think that's like the best way to put it.
You talked about like how everyone should have a flexible workflow and avoiding like cookie cutter systems. So what's a sign that like a process isn't working for someone, or maybe it's good on paper, but it's just not working on the day to day?
That's a great question. So one of two scenarios. One, the client keeps repeating, I know I should, ... and then insert whatever that is. And they keep saying this every single week. And they're like, I know I should create more thorough episode notes, or I know I should create more social media, whatever. So it just, to me, it tells me that clearly the process is not working because it's not naturally like getting you there, right? There's a lot of friction. And then the second is they're spending a lot of time on minutia. So basically they're like, this is not really getting me what I need. And so they tweak. And so they're overcomplicating it. Right. So I find that whether the tool is not necessarily what they need, but basically because they're doing week to week, and a strategy that I use is like really assessing, does it make sense to have a podcast week to week, or should we go and move into seasonal, so that it gives you time. It gives you a breather, not only to think through content strategy, but also to really assess your processes. Because if a tool is not giving you what you need, yet every week you're strapped for time, right? And you keep going to that tool because you have no time to learn a new tool or to research a new tool, or sometimes is to realize that you need to ask your strategist like me or your coach for a different tool that can better serve you. If this keeps happening, it's a sign that you need to like stop what you're doing and maybe pause the podcast intentionally and move into a different format so you actually can launch more successfully. So I find that those are like the two things that I see time and time again. People fighting it for too long, just getting it's not right, but like doesn't matter, like I gotta get this done, and they spend hours doing this. Or then like that other process. I find that like those two are super common.
I think there's a huge kind of like misconception that you have to constantly be creating content every single week, every single episode, have an episode that goes live every Thursday. If you miss a day, you're not good enough is the word I'm going to use, and all of the things, right? And about, I want to say a year and a bit ago, I paused my first podcast that like brought me into the world of podcasting because I'm like, this just doesn't feel in alignment anymore, So there's like a difference between trying to create something and just do it every single week because you feel like you have to, versus creating it with the intention and understanding why it is that you're doing that. Like we do that within the agency, like you were saying earlier, making sure there's a purpose and an intention for every episode. If there isn't one, then what are we doing? You know what I mean? There's so much noise out there. Why would we add to the noise? Like you have to add to an intentional conversation, in my opinion. But of course, there's all kinds of podcasts that take all types of different, shapes and forms and all of that. You mentioned like your tech stack. What are some of the tools that you use now? Because you're not an agency, you're not like a podcast manager for a ton of shows and all the things. What do you use as a solo creator? Because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah. So I try to leverage the tools that the software already that I'm using has. So for instance, let's start with Asana. I use Asana for communicating with, of course, like my clients, but to communicate with my assistant too. So that's why I write my ideas. That's actually like how I write. I write my outlines there. So I read from there.
Okay. Do you use a teleprompter?
I don't because a couple of reasons. One, actually, I'm cross-dyed. So basically, having strabismus, if I'm looking too much into a camera and I'm reading, I'm like, as you, the viewer, you're like, where is she looking at? And I'm like looking at the camera and reading, and you can't tell. So I'm like leveraging what works for you. This is a side note, but it depends on whatever type of strabismus that you have. But like some people, you see independently through both eyes. So I can never see 3D. And so that's why like each eye looks like it's looking at a different direction. And so basically when I'm reading, it's like I never know which eye is looking. And so it can look slightly off. So again, thinking about what works for you, I don't want to re-record a whole episode. So I just go in thinking, all right, if using a teleprompter doesn't work for me, and kind of like having an outline helps me stay true roughly to it. And again, I'm a former journalist. I've done this for many years. So of course, like I leverage, and it was really awkward in the beginning. I'll tell you this because I was like, I've done audio, like that sounds great. And now video is slightly different, but leaning into the discomfort, the cringe, it's going to get like easier at some point, right? So I record it. I actually record, depends. I actually use quick QuickTime Player to record my solo episodes, which is free, comes built in, and no one ever thinks about it because it's immediate. You record it, it's within your software right away. There's no processing times, there's no crashing out most times, so it's very reliable. If I'm doing interviews, I use Riverside to record remote interviews, and then I slap it on the script to edit the visual, to use the visual editor, because I actually used to use Premiere, and I was like, that's too, like, I don't really vibe with Premiere. I used to use it for the production side and I really don't enjoy it. So, I use Descript, and then I use Canva for creating the thumbnails, and I use Squarespace for hosting, of course, for my website. And actually my website, sometimes when I'm in between seasons, I use the RSS feed that is on my blog side, which is the podcast side, to send a newsletter, an RSS newsletter automatically once the episode is published, goes out there. I also use YouTube, of course, and Captivate.
Anna, where does the RSS newsletter go? Because you've been doing this for a while,
Yes.
and this is not a common thing that I think a lot of podcasters do or know about.
I'm happy to share it. So basically, you can... On most newsletters, I actually created a guide for this because it's one of those really simple formats that you can use to send out a podcast, because everyone at some point in their life, they go, I want to take a social media break, but you never hear people saying like, I'm taking an email break, right? So that's a very reliable way to promote a podcast. So I use ConvertKit, which is now Kit, but this is available on MailChimp, MailerLite, Constant Contact. The only one that does not have an RSS integration is Flowdesk. But every other single one, basically it's an automation. So it pulls an RSS feed and says, hey, whenever a new episode is out, email my email list with the details that I have pre-designed. So it's super cool. Like, it takes maybe an hour to set it up. It took me 2 hours because I was like very into the details. I was like, okay, no, I want this cover art because I want to be above the fold, all the things. But if all you want is just to send that email, basically it has the information that is new and updated to every single episode, whether that's the title and the description. And then you have a button that links to your feed, which will have the most recent episode. And it's one of the most practical ways podcasters can actually use to send out. And every single email provider has documentation on how to set up an RSS feed, period. So it's super easy.
That is so cool. I wonder if this integrates with Go High Level, because that's what I use for on the agency side. That's super, super cool. So then in the rest after that, was there anything else that you wanted to add to that? Because I kind of cut you off mid-sentence, but I wanted our listener to hear the RSS side.
Yeah, so then there's that part. So I email my list. If, again, because I'm always testing things, sometimes I send it automatically, sometimes I send it. And when I say sometimes, it's not that every other week I'm doing something different. It's per season. So I test things per seasons. Consistency, guys, is important for our listeners. Or should I say for our audience, because sometimes they're watching. But then I go and take, clips from the episode, whether that's using Riverside or I was just telling you guys, like, I pick up my phone sometimes if I can't find a good clip that encompasses something, because I went on a tangent, as I did in this conversation many times. Strategically is better sometimes for me to pick up a phone, and actually that type of post will perform a lot better if it is like a direct-to-camera video where I'm like, hey, did you know that I use 7 different types of platforms to kind of get the podcast going beginning to end. In this podcast episode, I'm telling you which one they are and how you can use them in a more strategic way to save time. This is a way better episode, like teaser, than just like selecting a random clip. So I do that sometimes when I'm like, yeah, that was a mess. Because again, sometimes you didn't hit the point. So social media audiences need to get it right away. And I find that there's been a transition in how people perceive and consume content. It's more of a discoverability channel, right? Like, you're exposed to new creators all the time on your feeds, on your discovery feeds, everything. And so basically people need to figure out exactly what you're about and what is it for them within a few seconds. And so if you're rambling, people go, I don't care who you are, goodbye, right? So understanding that every part of your process, again, being intentional and thinking strategically about every step of the way, will really help you not get overwhelmed. So every time I'm posting something, I'm like, okay, what's the purpose of this post? What do I want the audience to do next? So those are all the things. Sometimes I do quote cards on Canva. People actually can edit videos on Canva as well. It's not as amazing, but you can too. So those are the things that I use beginning to end, I guess.
It's amazing. You know, I was thinking of it with just the piece that you added about Canva. I had like a brief thought that came into my mind. If you can edit something on Canva and make it look so good, imagine, because it's like the hardest way that you could edit. Imagine what you could do in like software that is easier to edit. You know what I mean? I don't know. I feel like it's so much easier.
And you know something? I find that a lot of people will go to Canva and overcomplicate it. And in 1 hour, they only did, like I had one client, she consistently threw it to Canva. And I was like, you understand that you're taking 3 times as long when you just could go and, you know, use, for instance, like Riverside or another software, or even YouTube clips. You can actually go into the edit that file, like select the single bit, and it will perform better than having all of these animations, all of these like things juggling, and like nobody cares. Like it's sometimes raw, and not in the same like hot mess, but a little easier, more natural, or then hyper produced. Those are the 2 edges of, I find that the content that performs better on social media from podcasters.
100%. I think that people get really desensitized also from the same style of clips that are constantly going out. It's like, okay, I've seen this. And it doesn't matter like what the content is. You're like, do I give this a couple of seconds? You know, oh, it's like Hermosi style clips. And you're like, okay. Like,
or diary,
you know,
it's
over. Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't make them bad. You know, you get desensitized in that way. But Anna, I would love to quickly talk about, because we were talking about content planning, we're talking about that side there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on strategies that podcasters can use to stay consistent without burning out. And then maybe after that, we can talk about how you prep for summer hiatus. And then we'll wrap up with where our listeners can find you.
Awesome. Thank you. Have 2 to 3 templates, and that's it. I think that podcasters want to reinvent the wheel every time. So a different intro, like for instance, I find that somewhere, and again, it depends on the type of show. When I have interviews, I actually don't use the guest's teaser, like a random part of the interview. A lot of shows do. For me, it doesn't work. For some clients, it doesn't work because they start getting really lost. They're like, oh, what was the angle? Maybe they moved away. So have a clear goal with that first episode, and every single element has to go with it, right? So the intro sometimes is easier that you interview your guest and then you record an intro about the actual, like maybe you covered something really interesting and that will help you in the marketing. So always start with why should people listen to this episode and why are you releasing it? And then make every decision be guided through that. Do not make yourself guided by, oh, my competitor is doing this, therefore I have to, right? I must. Otherwise, I feel like I'm behind. You don't know your competitors' budgets, availability, skill sets. If someone has a great eye for like what makes a good clip, for instance, for social media, through looking through the timeline, and you don't, let's not do that, right? You're going to be wasting a lot of time. So really focus on your strengths and really look at, when we're looking through, like for instance, the tech stack, like is it actually matching your needs? Could there be a better software that could help you combine a few features in one? Maybe it's a better tool, especially podcasters they spend a lot of money with software. And so really question, just because you started with that software 2 years ago or 7 months ago, 12 months ago, it doesn't mean that it's still maybe there's a software that someone else is doing. So talk to your peers and ask them, or even your audience. Like I find that podcast audiences are very involved. And so they actually have a lot of knowledge about podcasting. So like ways to send, comments to your favorite host or something like that. And then another element that I think is really important to just stay true is do not publish just for the sake of it. To your point, if there's no reason, maybe go on a season. Like for instance, some clients, they got promoted, it didn't work out. So let's communicate with our audience. Like that stress that we carry, the need to publish, the need to do this, it's because we think, oh, my audience is expecting it. Like our podcast audiences they go about their day, they have their habits, and podcasts fit into their schedule, not the other way around. So if you don't release an episode, they will fill it out with something else. But then if you go, hey, I'm back, they're going to be like, I love this podcast. Let me shove it back into my schedule, right? So we have to stop being afraid of like that scarcity mindset of once I stop publishing, like they'll forget about me. They won't. And even maybe some people will stop listening because their life circumstances change. So let's move away from that. I have to be on social media because everybody else. I have to be on podcasting because everybody else is publishing episodes, right? I find that brings a lot of stress and anxiety. And every now and again, really think about when you're having guests, every single decision that is bringing you a lot of overwhelm. I think that going back to the analytics is very important. Questioning your actions, questioning like, why am I doing this? Is this still bringing me joy? Is this still bringing me leads, for instance, if that's what you want? I find that the overwhelm is created in our heads because we have no direction. Once we have direction, we know our why. It will really help. And so moving into the summer strategies, there's 4 months in the year in which podcast listeners will seek new shows. That's January, March, July, and October. I find that it's very strategic to start creating content that appeals to the masses, to people who don't know your content, to tap into those audiences. They are looking for new shows anyway, because again, January, beginning of the year, new me, looking for shows that fit the interests that I have. March is like, if you had a crazy beginning of the year, maybe it's like springtime, you're like, oh my gosh, I need to finally get going. Then July, summertime. That's where we're at right now. It's summer. People have different habits, different routines. So they're looking for different types of shows. And then October, everybody's freaking out. It's the end of the year. All the goals that I said, maybe I'm not there yet. Or maybe I had so much going on that I need to slow down, right? So thinking through the listener behavior in that sense really helps you determine, okay, I can actually take a break during the summer and just promote old episodes. I find that, again, like I was very transparent and I talk to my clients all the time, and I do this the same. If you're the host, you're in the driving seat. So we have to ask ourselves, does it make sense to continue publishing? Do I need to step back? Because I think that we all want our podcast to grow. But if we are constantly in the hamster wheel, it's really hard to get perspective, to miss it, or to just have the opportunity to do things differently, to improve in our other areas. For instance, I'm taking a break right now, and I normally suggest clients that if they're taking a break, let's continue promoting the podcast in different ways. So maybe more guesting, right? Maybe repurposing old episodes and just promote episodes that didn't do so well last summer. And you're like, those episodes were great. Let me repurpose that and share them again. Or maybe ask a former guest of the show and say, hey, can you play this episode on your podcast? That was such a great show. And again, super kind of like air quotes lazy way to promote the podcast. You don't constantly need to be in motion publicly on your feed to get new listeners, to get traction. For instance, podcast conferences. I just attended a couple in the past 3 months and my podcast downloads grew. Why? Because in every single of these conferences, I had conversations. I was like, I have a great playlist for you. Start here. I give a lot of direction to the people that when I was on stage, I said, I'm the host of this podcast, and kind of pause. So they're like, okay, let me finish taking notes. So every opportunity is a way to promote the podcast. And again, the podcast is a great evergreen way to promote our expertise, to be top of mind. But we don't need to constantly be creating content. We really need to think about like, how can I milk this episode? Because I used to be a big fan of the best of, right? Like record a dedicated intro, which takes 1 minute. And so you say, hey, summertime right now, I selected the best 10 interviews with really inspiring women to inspire you this summer, because maybe you're slowing down and you don't want to take action, but you want to build that excitement, right? You give the reason why your audience should be excited. And again, look at the analytics. Sometimes the analytics do give us a lot of direction. If there's already some important kind of trends happening, lean into that. But also at the same time, like what is happening in the quarter after the break in the summer, right? Do you want to start warming up people to the idea of something that you have coming up? Don't just go and drop it and surprise, right? I am writing a book. I'm going to be writing a book in the summer. I'm in the process of actually researching, doing market research, understanding what is being out there, what has been created, what gap could I fill within my expertise. And I started talking about it online, right? Like right before I left, one of the things that I said was like, actually this summer I'm going to be writing a book and I want to take a break from the show so I can focus fully on that, right? And so it's not sloppy. It is not a bad thing to take a break if you share with your listeners why. And the amount of people who will then in turn go, oh my God, thank you for giving me permission to like take a break. Some of my clients were like, I never thought that would be a possibility. I'm like, I love that for you, because again, if you're doing it, you need to sometimes take a break from it and come back and renew that excitement. Anyway, it was such a long answer, but I hope that listeners are kind of like, never thought about that. I mean, I know they will.
There's so many light bulb moments that had in my mind as you were talking, because I feel like there's so many different shoulds that you have to do, quote unquote, when you're in this podcasting world. And there's a lot of rules, and there's a lot of people who've been in the space for a long time. They have a lot of opinions and all this stuff. And it's, if you're not a weekly podcast, you're not really a podcast. Like, there's all this stuff, you know what I mean? And it's honestly, if you're not creating, again, something that is going to add to the overall purpose of what you're doing, why are we doing it? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. And I like your tips for repurposing, especially like summertime content, because I feel like we don't always give ourselves the space to get creative of like, how can we take the show and repurpose it in different ways? I love the idea of, you know, having a playlist to direct people of where to start. That's a great idea. Do you create that on Spotify?
Yes, I created it on Spotify, but also on YouTube. And I have on my website, on the podcast tab, it's thepodcastbase.com/podcast. And so basically I have one tab for categories. So for instance, one is marketing, the other one is analytics, the other one is events or whatever, right? So basically it guides the user to do the next step. But I find that actually someone messaged me and said, okay, this is a tip. And we're still not giving tips, but I'm like, have to. So talking to our listeners will really we have to go first. We have to talk to them because in their head, we're a celebrity, we're out of reach. So ask people how they found your podcast, because you will be surprised every time. Somebody said that a Spotify playlist is how they found my podcast, because they were looking for ways to start a podcast. And they saw an audiobook, but then they saw the playlist and they were like, I was getting really overwhelmed with the audiobook, and that was not mine. It was like someone else's. So again, thinking through keywords, like how do people search for things? My playlist is called Podcast Basics. So, it helped that person find me. So I think it's super useful to think about, okay, what about people that don't know you? How are they finding? Which words are they using to find your content?
Well, that's really great too, because you're literally directing them to solve the problem that they have, and then think of you as the first person to help do that.
What's one thing that you're really excited about right now in your own podcasting world? I know you're going to speak very soon at a conference. It could be like a tool, a project, just a shift of how, you're doing things right now.
I'm really excited about more people experimenting with more formats and becoming more, try different formats like live podcasting or, going on YouTube and using specific segments to go. And I find that that's really cool. For instance, actually one thing that I want to try. So I moved from Dallas to Bentonville in October. I got myself a bike, and because the biking community is really big here. So I actually want to do a podcast episode on the bike.
I got so excited about that I almost hit stop recording.
Oh gosh. That is so cool though. But I'm here already thinking like, how would you do? Like, are you going to be like riding the bike? And what about the wind? Is there like special microphone for that?
Yeah, I do actually have a microphone that is for wind. And I actually have a few little ones. So I'm still playing around. If you don't see this, you have to look on the video format of this right now. It's like a little microphone. This is a clip-on. It has a little like fuzzy, let's call it fuzzy, because fuzzy, everybody knows what fuzzy is. And clip on it. And I'm by no means daredevil cyclist. I'm granny style. Just like I like my driving, I like my cycling very slowly. So I'm very curious to just give it a go. Probably it's going to be like a solo. And maybe I like being very meta. Like the way that I ended the season was like how to promote your podcast in between seasons, because it was the last episode. So I'll probably do think about like the weirdest podcast place you can record an episode or something, like, you know what I mean? Like, how can you push the boundaries of your creativity? Even if you never publish that episode, go through the process, because even if the episode is a little terrible, it doesn't matter. Like, I'll probably use it for social media and talk about it, how I did it. So that's kind of like a unique angle. That is something that I want to do.
I love that.
And push the creativity standard, because I think that when you lose your creativity on your podcast processes, your audience will suffer because you're not doing it for the right reasons, or you're just like, kind of rinse and repeat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to book my flight to you, and then we can tandem bike and do a podcast episode. I can sit in the back.
Yes. Oh my God. I would make a compilation of just the sounds of us going like, like, Carvin coming. We're going to turn. Oh my God. Yes.
Anna, slow down.
There's a cat on
No,
the
you'll
way.
be like, go faster. Oh my God.
Oh, go faster. I'd be like, what is the speed of this thing? Are we like 5 miles an hour?
Yes. I mean,
That's so funny. Anna, thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks for sharing everything that you shared. We're so grateful. Can you share with our listener where they can find you?
yes.
And maybe a resource that you can help them?
Yes. So I'm going to invite you to listen to the podcast Space. It's available everywhere you listen to your podcast, as well as on thepodcastspace.com/podcast. And if you want to talk to me, the one place I always direct people to is my Instagram, the podcast Space. I do reply, it's me. And you'll find inspiration on, like better ways to promote your podcast, better ways to sustain that podcast idea, push yourself in terms of creativity in a way that feels exciting. And, I'll educate and let you know what's going on in the industry. So definitely follow me there and say hi on the DMs. I will reply, I promise.
She really will. I love it. Thank you so much, Anna. We really appreciate it. Taly, anything else before we wrap up today?
Yes, I just want to do a quick run through of our key takeaways just so we can have a finalized list of everything that Anna shared with us. So one of the things that Anna shared was your workflow should match your energy, your goal, and your capabilities and your capacity overall. And the other thing that Anna shared that I love it's templates. They're your best friend. And then don't publish just for publish. And consistency comes from clarity, not pressure. And then use tools that actually support your workflow and not just create additional work for you. And then your audience will come back. So even if you take a break, don't worry, your audience will come back. And then talk to your listeners, literally, just like Anna does. She'll reply you on DM. And then repurposing is a growth strategy, not a backup plan. So thank you so much, Anna, for being here with us. I learned so much, as I always do with you. So I do appreciate your being here with us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. This was so fun.
It was so fun. Thank you all for tuning in today, and we will see you next time behind the workflow.